This is Danny Frank for GNAT TV. As I've said many times on this show, we have some amazing people who live in southern Vermont. And today our guest is Tom Peters, one of America's most prominent authors of business management books, and one of America's best-known corporate speakers, and a West Tinmouth resident, right, of Vermont?
It's a fact.
Right. And Tom Peters, before we talk about In Search of Excellence, which I guess would be considered your signature book, published in 1982, you've had a very interesting career of experiences that have included everything from serving in the United States Navy, 2 deployments in Vietnam years ago, and serving at the Pentagon, working as a White House aide in the Nixon administration, and then working, of course, as a management consultant. So give our viewers some description and a little retrospective of the early Tom Peters.
Well, Tinmouth probably has 350 residents, and I grew up in a little town about 5 miles, 6 miles from Annapolis, Maryland, that probably had about 250 residents. You know, in between, I spent 35 years out on the West Coast and so on, but I was not, I now live on a dirt road, and I grew up on a dirt road. Now, my mother called me a liar because she said, you know, they'd paved the road because it was a big thing to pave the road. But so she's gone on to other places. So I have no idea which one of us is right. But as far as I'm concerned, it was from dirt road to dirt road. But you know, you mentioned the Navy thing, and I was talking to somebody about it the other day, and all the fuss that went on about Vietnam. If you were born in '42, as I was, everybody's dad fought in World War II.
Sure.
And my uncle was a Marine at Guadalcanal, and he actually replaced General Fuller on the line there as a major and so on. So, you know, it was probably not the smartest war that we ever got involved in, but a whole lot of us who came out of that contest, you know, we weren't patriots. We just didn't think twice. Everybody, that's what you did. You know, the country called and so on. And so, you know, we grew up with that, and then grew up with this thing that I know where, you know, national security issues are never easy, and they certainly aren't easy now. But there are a lot of people who tend to forget that for 40 years, 10,000 of their missiles were aimed at 10,000 of our missiles. And I remember my uncle, who was then a 2-star, 3-star general on Okinawa, called my aunt, who was living in McLean, Virginia, this was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and said, take the kids the heck out of town.
Sure.
You know, they really thought it was coming. So, you know, I grew up with that sort of stuff, but I also, you know, grew up 200 yards from the Severn River, and as I used to talk about summers like this, school ended on about the 10th of June. We went down to the river, and then we came back on Labor Day, basically, and waved to our parents along the way. So it was a pretty rural, you know, pretty rural growing up.
So after your time at McKinsey & Company, In Search of Excellence became a bestseller classic with, I believe, it's 6 million copies sold to
Nobody
date.
has a clue, because you know, the Chinese ripped us off even more than they're doing today. And I went over to China in '86, and I met something like 8 or 9 publishers, all of whom said, you were a best-selling, you know, how much did I coin in terms of royalties? I'm still waiting for the first penny, but
really?
So God alone knows.
Really?
Well, you know, they're not terribly respectful of intellectual property rights in 2012.
Sure.
30 years ago, not at all.
Sure. And some of the emerging business principles that some of the trends that were embraced during that period back in the 80s.
Well,
just
you know,
give us a flavor.
In a way, Danny, it wasn't that different than it is today, in the sense that by blind luck, we published, I'm not sure it's the right word for us, my co-author Bob Waterman and I, we published right during the pits of the Reagan recession. And in fact, the week that the book came out, which was in October of '82, the White House had to announce 10% unemployment. And you know, everybody thought that you and I would both be speaking Japanese by 2012.
Sure.
The Japanese handed the automobile industry their lunch and a bunch of other things. And you know, you know, back to being born in World War II, we sat in the catbird seat from 1946 to about 1975 or 80, and then the real world descended, and we were not all alone at the top of the perch. And the fascinating thing, or funny thing, choose your word, we were mad about pretty much the same thing. Now we're mad about Wall Street. Then we were mad about lousy quality. It was, you know, these Americans who won the war, why are we making cars that people don't want to drive? And so, you know, that was kind of the enemy. But people were, I mean, as we know, Reagan brought us out of the recession not with brilliant economic policy, but by smiling and
feeling good,
feeling good, whistling "Happy Days Are Here Again." That's
sure,
right.
Sure.
But it was fundamentally the same set of problems, which is to say, it's a long-winded way of getting around to your answer, that we had kind of left the basics behind. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the same thing that happened to us. You know, we need Wall Street, God alone knows. You need bankers, you need investment banks. It makes the economy work. It always has. On the other hand, there's no question that the last 8 or 9 years there has been wretched excess and then some. A guy, you know, the biggest, I think, of the mutual funds, I'm not sure you call them that when they're no fee, is the Vanguard Fund. It's run out of Philadelphia, and John Bogle, Jack Bogle, is the guy who started it. Well, he wrote a fabulous book about 2 years ago, and the book is called Enough. And it's even better than that because the title is ENOUGH exclamation mark. But, you know, there's a finance guy for you, and he said, you know, he fundamentally said, let's get back to integrity, let's get back to a little bit of patience, and so on. So there's, you know, as far as I'm concerned, in 30 years of writing books, I haven't said a damn thing that's interesting at all. My opening line in my speeches is, I am here today to remind you of what your grandmother taught you, but somehow or other in the heat of the battle you forgot it along the way. Take care of your people and, you know, behave with some decency, listen to your customers when they talk. This is, you know, as that old one-liner goes, this ain't rocket science.
Tom Peters, when you describe empowering decision makers at multiple levels of a company, in reality, how many companies actually function this way in contrast to policy being established at the top and handed down from the top?
Well, there's a really important thing, and I take my full share of blame. Because of all this fuss over business issues that started in the 80s, a whole bunch of people, and it's a horrible term, they called them or called us management gurus. Well, one of the many sins of the management gurus is we acted as if the world consisted of the Fortune 500. The reality is you and I are having this conversation in southern Vermont, and there are dozens upon dozens of fabulous companies. Some of them have 1 employee, some of them have 2 employees, some of them have 12 employees or what have you. And so I'm always very careful to say, people say, who's your favorite excellent company? And my answer is, I don't have a clue, because I'm not going to give you the answer like, well, it's GE or well, it's Google or something like that. We have, you know, we have 20, 30 million companies in this country, and in terms of superior management and helping people develop, you know, I'm willing to, you know, stack hand Chevrolet up with any of the big guys, except, and so it's really key that you not get trapped on this excellence has to do with being $40 billion in size. But, you know, they always say that you and I use a small share of our brain cells, and I think the average company, including the good ones, doesn't come within a country mile of really utilizing, in the best sense of the word, you know, the brains that people bring to work. There's a guy who was at my blog site, and he wrote a couple of years ago, and I stole it, albeit I mentioned his name, and put it in my book. And he said, the 4 most important words in any organization are what do you think? And, you know, the guy on the ground, if you will, to use that overused phrase, is a lot closer to the action. And he knows when some policy which made sense to the guy who wrote it doesn't make a damn bit of sense when you're dealing with the car buyer or dealing with the customer in the restaurant and so on. So, you know, we all have a long way to go in terms of helping people develop. And, of course, with the technologies that are coming down in the next 10 or 20 years, it is infinitely important compared to the past because, you know, there just aren't a whole lot of jobs, even in a rural state, for people who use a pick and shovel. It's a new world for jobs.
Well, Tom Peters, even though you don't have a, quotes, favorite company, close quotes, could you give us a few examples of companies that you would admire them for their business practices and why companies
Well,
that
one of them is I go down to Washington a lot. Among other things, I'm not quite the boy I used to be, and all my doctors are down there. And I fly out of Albany down to BWI, and I fly on Southwest Airlines. And Southwest does a heck of a lot of things right. I mean, first of all, the fares are reasonable, which is no small thing. People say, well, you know, it's a little bit crowded and so on. And my response is always, when I started flying, it was always rich businessmen who are on the plane, and now grandmother can fly to Denver to watch her grandson graduate from the University of Denver, which grandmother sure as heck could not have done 30 years ago unless she won the lottery. But, you know, the Southwest people, they pay attention to their customers, and they kind of seem to get off on being on the airplane. And I know a lot of the management stuff is embittered employees, but, you know, the average employee on the average airline is pretty damn grouchy, frankly. And the Southwest people get a kick out of things. One of them landed at BWI and started singing to us the other day about, oh, we loved how, you know. I mean, I have the world's, you know, you didn't ask me to come here to sing. I'm reasonably clear of that, so I will save our viewers of that experience. But they take care of their people. And the guy who ran it, who I just adored, I did a TV show with him. His name is Herb Kelleher. And when it's back to your last question, when they said to Herb, "What's your secret to success?" his answer was, "My employees are my #1 customer." And I really pound on that. If you want to put the customer first, then you have to put the person who serves the customer even more first, because you win the customer's allegiance when that flight attendant or gate person is smiling. I mean, that's you know, plane's got to land on time and the engines have got to be well maintained, but that happens in an awful lot of places. It's always attitude. You know that better than I.
So Southwest Airlines, and give us one more.
Well, I hate to be shockingly and astonishingly boring, but God alone knows Apple has demonstrated that if you make a better mousetrap, they will come, to mix the metaphor or whatever it is. I mean, Steve Jobs was not the sweetest human being God ever put on earth, and I hold that against him. You know, life is too short. On the other hand, it was better stuff. And, you know, they had a ton of problems along the way, and Microsoft had to lend them $100 million at one point and so on. But, you know, when people talk to me about marketing and so on, and what are your marketing tricks, and, you know, you know how to market, I know how to market a little bit, I say the #1 marketing trick is to have a good product or service. And then we'll talk about all the sexy things you can do with social media or what have you. But social media isn't going to do you or me a damn bit of good if the two of us don't have something to say.
Right.
And you know, that's the bedrock. And I said to somebody, I have nothing whatsoever against ExxonMobil, but the day that Apple surpassed them in market capitalization, it sent a message that cool products, particularly in 2012, will win the day.
Sure, sure. Tom Peters, your most recent book, I believe, was in 2010, The Little Big Things, and what's been the reaction, the response on that.
What I want to tell you first is the subtitle was 163 ways to get to excellence, and there's a method behind my madness here. Is the first item was from somebody nearby, not quite southern Vermont, but I drive to Boston a lot, and it's 173 miles from West Teignmouth, and exactly at the 82.5-mile mark is a little restaurant called Wagon Wheel and Wheel singular in Gill, Massachusetts. Now, I'm not sure all of our viewers will understand this, Danny, but there is a certain age when males are looking at about the 72.5-mile mark for an opportunity to find a restroom. I mean, I'm sure you may not be, I know you are a part of that crowd, but at any rate, so I started with this book with 163 items with the restrooms at the Wagon Wheel. And first of all, they're clean. Second of all, they have flowers. Gill, Massachusetts is part of that, you know, that area where the old industrial towns were, like Pittsfield and so on. And so there are factories right across the river, and they got all these fabulous pictures of the guys in their stiff collared suits sitting around at a banquet that, was celebrating the end of the year. And it's so, the food's good. I stopped for an extra croissant or Cinnabon, which I shouldn't, But fundamentally, it's the character. I mean, it's those kinds of things that make the difference. It's those kinds of things that you remember. And so, and the point is, number one, you can do it in Gill, Massachusetts with with a restaurant that has 20 tables. But point number two is the same darn thing holds for banks. There was a bank that they were actually sold to Toronto Dominion, or TD Bank, but they were called Commerce Bank. And Commerce Bank, among other things, some people measured profit and loss. They measured the number of dog biscuits they gave away every year, because they said, we don't want you at the ATM. We want you in the branch so we can sell you some more products.
Sure.
And by the way, if you're out wandering around New York City or Philly or wherever, bring your dog. And, again, if the technical part of it was wrong and so on, you're sure as heck not going to go in. But, it's the kind of thing which makes you smile, and when you smile, you go back. I got to tell you one other little tiny story like that, because it's how I start all my presentations these days. There was a banquet that was honoring Conrad Hilton's career, and after a whole bunch of people roasted him, he came up to the podium, and the MC said, well, now, Mr. Hilton, will you share your management secrets with us? And he looked at this crowd of grandees and shook his finger at them and said, don't forget to tuck the shower curtain into the bathtub. And with that, he turned and walked off. And the way I like to describe it to people is you get them in the door because you got location, 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 and a sexy architect designed the place. But you don't make money on the first visit. You make money on visits 7 through 37, plus the uncles and aunts and colleagues who you told about. You get them back with the shower curtain.
The shower curtain. Very important.
Absolutely.
So, Tom Peters, what is your definition, your description of the new economy?
Jobs ain't what they used to be and ain't gonna be what they are even today, for starters. Now, again, I'm always a little bit careful. The one-liner I use in big cities is lifetime employment is dead, and that's true. But the reality, I was going on, I think, the Today Show or Good Morning America or something when an earlier book came out, and I was thinking, now, how am I going to explain this? And I said, well, I live in rural Vermont. If you talked about lifetime employment, the carpenter, the guy who does the horseshoeing, the plumber, and the electrician would laugh hysterically. They are as good as having showed up on time for the last job and done a good piece of work. And so, for most Americans, even in the New Yorks of the world or the Phillies of the world, do not work in giant companies. And so, that's not news, the lifetime employment part. But the part that, is news I think, and there's controversy around this, is where the technology is going to go in the next 20 years. And I hate to say this because I'd love to be around to do this show 20 years from now, is I'm kind of 10% glad I'm not going to be around to do it. So, you know, a little example, Danny, because, you know, we hear all the other sexy stuff. There was a big article in Bloomberg Businessweek on John Deere, which is going gangbusters because of the developing economies. And they're messing around now with some electronics so that one thresher will be able to control 6, you know, the big fields of the Midwest, 6 threshers behind it.
Really?
And the 6 behind it will not have drivers. And so, you know, we talk about jobs. I mean, and, you know, driving one of those big machines is not exactly a minimum wage job. That's a damn serious job.
Sure.
You know, of great value. And so we're going from 7 drivers to 1 driver. And of course, the same thing is happening in the back offices of insurance companies. And
It's happened in television. We used to
in-
have a cameraman at every camera,
Oh,
a camera person.
Yeah, I remember the first time I went on CNN, which was when the first book came out in '82, and you know I had done a little bit of stuff on CBS and so on. You'd be in a room like this, and it would be filled with
Sure,
human beings.
sure.
And I walk into the CNN studio, and this is Taj Mahal by comparison.
Sure.
It was in San Francisco, and it was 2 inches wider on both sides in the booth.
Sure.
And there was, you know, 1 guy and 1 cameraman, and that was it. And so, yes, I mean, it's been coming, but, you know, too many people use that new word tipping, new term, or new to many of us, tipping point, too much. But I really think the technology is on the border of going a little bit berserk. And, you know, it means we really have to worry about the school system and producing the right kind of training for people who are going to be doing their thing tomorrow. But, you know, the problem, it's an opportunity, it always has been, we'll probably innovate our way out of it, is that the software now is doing the smart people's jobs. It's not, I mean, you know, anybody watching us who's had the experience of being in an automobile plant 40 years ago, 25 years ago, 15 years ago, and within the last 2 weeks remembers that there were dumb robots with low reliability that did spot welding and missed half the time. And now, you know, I mean, it's like, you know, Kia, I think, announced, or Hyundai announced a couple $100 million investment in the U.S., and God bless them, we can use the money, but it ain't bringing that many jobs.
Sure.
You look at an automobile plant today, and there are a lot of machines, and that's good because we make some of the machines that make the machines. And so don't get me wrong, I love the idea, but it's not doing what it used to do in any way, shape, or form, and we're just getting warmed up.
Tom Peters, you appear to have several themes in your message, including the importance of personal responsibility, which is very big today, that concept, and the need for us to reinvent ourselves, as you've just been mentioning, and the different stages in our society, our culture, our evolution, whether it is business or lifestyle.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, I wrote this book, and it you know, whatever. It did well, and some people loved it, some people didn't, but it was called The Brand You 50. And I said, you're a brand, or I'm a brand. And I didn't mean that we're particularly good at marketing, but what it did mean is that you're responsible for your own career. I hope you have a good boss, and I hope you're in a good company. Those things would be great, but as I said earlier, there's no lifetime employment, and so the person who's in charge of your career now is you. And what that means is you got to learn something new every day. That's the content side. You got to smile if it kills you. You know, I've been rereading Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and a lot of people like my books, but that is hands down the #1 management book that's ever been written, in my opinion, because at the end of the day, if you behave decently, people come back. And so there's a requirement for, as I say, personal development, and to me it's three big things. It's number one, doing what you say you'll do, which means, you know, there was a kid, young man who had just graduated from Duke University with a civil engineering degree, and it's a fabulous school, and he couldn't get the kind of job that he wanted to get or should have been able to get with a very fabulous degree like that. And his dad, who I work with, asked me if I'd talk to him. And so I said, look, here's the deal. You're 22 years old. I said, let me tell you, when I go to hire you at 30, what I'm looking for from a 22-year-old in your background. I said, showed up to work on time, worked hard, got along well with the people that he was working with. I said, those are the only three boxes. I don't care whether you are a shift manager at McDonald's or whether you're doing something for Google. That's what I'm looking for. I want to see those basics, and then we'll worry about all the fabulous things that you can do. But, you know, it's it's what your grandmother taught you.
Tom Peters, we have time for one more question, a fascinating half hour, and I'm going to pull one out of left field. A major cyber crisis. Everyone's expecting that someday this will hit an attack, okay? So how will that affect business and society?
It could cause total havoc. And the Senate just tossed, or the House just tossed out a cybersecurity bill. And I didn't read it, and so it may have been a piece of junk. But what I am completely clear on, and I'm not suggesting I'm one of the great experts, but what I'm completely clear on is we're not taking it half as seriously as we ought to. It's absolutely, in a way, it's hilarious that this is your last question, unless you've got some spy camera that you borrowed from the NSA, because I thought, what if these guys are behind schedule? So I always carry a book with me, and indeed the book is about cyber security. I think it's serious. I want an open and free internet. I lived in Silicon Valley, for heaven's sakes, for 35 years. I'm one of the good guys, but the yogurt could hit the fan. And one thing which is not terribly wonderful to say for our viewers or anybody else, I'm not real happy with the way the Chinese behave in that regard. They're incredibly important commercially, and they are a market for a lot that we do, but there's not any argument among the security experts that if you're looking for the source of most of the cyber attacks, you don't have to look much farther than China.
Tom Peters, internationally acclaimed author and management guru and resident of West Teignmouth, Vermont. Thank you very, very much for being our guest on this half hour.
Thanks very much. Great pleasure.
This is Danny Frank for GNAT TV.